smart enough to win. That's how the story starts. Learning is the edge that sets your work apart. When the stakes get high and the pressure never stops, smart learning in your pocket puts your business at the top.
Welcome to the Learning Advantage, from Insight to Impact, where we're going to show how smart learning fuels real business results. I'm Deb Laurel, and I'm your host. And I welcome you today. We're going to have a special guest, and I know you're going to enjoy him. For over 40 years, Laurel and Associates Limited has worked alongside national and international managers to help them successfully manage employees and create and maintain a positive, supportive, and healthy work environment where employees want to stay and do their best. We focus on making lackluster leaders legendary. The purpose of the Learning Advantage, from Insight to Impact, is to discuss how smart learning fuels real business results. In each episode, we strive to deliver actionable strategies, evidence-based design tips, and real-world case studies that show how learning strengthens organizational health, advances sustainability, and drives profitability. And for that reason, I'm delighted to introduce our guest for today, Marc Stoecker. Marc is an experienced life experience and L&D professional and facilitator with a passion for helping individuals and organizations unlock their full potential. With over 20 years of experience in coaching, training, design, and delivery, Marc brings a dynamic, learner-centered approach to every engagement. He holds certifications as an ICF-associated certified coach, a certified professional coactive coach through the Coactive Training Institute, and is a positive intelligence certified coach, specializing in mental fitness, resilience building, and purpose-driven leadership. Marc's instructional design experience is backed by a master's degree in instructional systems design, and he has designed and delivered interactive learning programs for corporate, nonprofit, and government clients. So welcome, Marc. I'm happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Deborah. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're going to get right into the questions. When you think about learning as a competitive advantage, what does that mean in the context of your work?
So I think it has to do with speed and effectiveness at which people can turn new information into new behavior. I think that there's a gap between knowing and doing things, and I think that's where organizations either excel or become stagnant. I also believe it relates to setting up some strong organizational outcomes and having things like performance and learning objectives that support those outcomes. And we talk about that during courses I teach at the Association of Talent Development. I'll also mention, I think that there's a Kirkpatrick model, which focuses on things like reactions, learning, behavior, and results. And there's now a new model of that. And that model argues that you have to design from level 4 backwards. You start with the business results you need, work back to the behavior of the learners, and then to the learning experience. So I think many organizations do that in reverse. They start with the content, and then they hope eventually it connects to something that matters. So if I may offer one other thought, and here's where I think it's interesting now is that AI is accelerating the pressure on this. L&D leaders are more and more treating AI as a co-designer and a co-analyst, using it to accelerate content curation, personalization, and assessment, while keeping educators like ourselves accountable for the methods and practice for teaching and ethics. Now, I believe that's where things are developing, and where AI is handling scale, pattern recognition, and we're handling the judgment as human beings. And I think organizations that understand that distinction are the ones building more of a competitive edge right now.
Right, that's a very good point. Can you share a specific example where a learning initiative moved from insight to real impact and how you measured that impact?
Sure. I appreciate you asking that. One recent example that comes to mind is an AI literacy series I've been designing for delivering to mid-career job seekers. It's mostly professionals in career transition. And some came to the workshop carrying some anxiety, understandably, about AI versus the curiosity we want in a learning and development classroom, right? So the insight was that most AI training was essentially a tool tutorial, like how to use Claude, how to use ChatGPT, et cetera. Here's the interface, here's how to prompt. That's basically a knowledge transfer model. But the actual barrier in this case wasn't knowledge, it was trust in their own judgment once AI entered the picture. So I redesigned parts of the series. I went using a version of action mapping logic, targeting more of the specific behavior that needed to change. So the goal wasn't just the participant knows how to use Claude, for example. It was they use AI to amplify their own thinking, not replace it, which is a different design target. So basically, the concept of merging human intelligence and artificial intelligence. So the perspective is AI didn't dominate, it integrates and augments. So one thing I included in the design was micro-learning between the sessions. Short focused practice prompts that you can do, short trainings. They can do them in under 10 minutes before the next session. So the most recent one, I included a participant guide with a handful of prompts, workflows they could reflect on, and an action plan that ideally they're going to take advantage of. So the feedback after the sessions was that the sessions were helpful for participants, showing some of the impact of how they incorporated the learning into their job search process. We also had repeat attendees to the other sessions and participants during the live sessions, in between the live activities, saying they were able to apply in the moment what was shared in a job search situation they were dealing with, and it helped them move the needle forward. So that's one example that comes to mind.
Oh, that's great. It can be scary facing something new and something technical.
And cyberphobia is something that comes up as part of a coaching, the human intelligence, the HI. We talk about AI a lot, but the human side I think comes through too. Quite often we remember what we need to embrace about ourselves as learners, as human beings. So just wanted to add that thought.
Oh, thank you. What do you see as the biggest barrier preventing organizations from fully embracing lifelong learning, and how do you think we can overcome it?
I think the biggest there isn't budget or technology. I think it's the organizations that say they value learning. They don't always design workflows that match that value. So I think organizations have values, corporate values, and they don't always lean into them, and in this case, from a learning perspective. So when budgets are tight or priorities are reviewed, I think we've experienced, if you're a learning development professional, the learning initiatives get cut. There's actually a 2024 workplace learning report from LinkedIn that found that aligning learning to business strategy was L&D's top priority for the second year running. And yet most teams are still measuring things such as metrics, things like completion, satisfaction scores. But if you can't connect learning to business impact, you'll always be the first thing cut, learning and development. So I think overcoming it requires two strategies. First, look at designing from performance, not content, which is what the action mapping I mentioned earlier and Kirkpatrick's backward design both highlight. And then the second is embedding the learning into the work itself rather than scheduling it along the work. So that's maybe a different viewpoint. And I also think that's where microlearning becomes strategically important, because some research shows the average employee has roughly 24 minutes a week for formal learning, and 59% receive no workplace training at all. That's not absolute, of course, but it's something to consider. So that's a design issue versus an engagement issue. If you're building a 90-minute course for people who have 10 minutes, that presents a challenge. So that's a few thoughts on that.
giving me so much to think about. In your view, what's one outdated belief about corporate learning that we need to let go of, and what should replace it?
That's a great question. I think a belief that needs to go is if we build it, they'll learn it. The idea that well-designed content in front of people, you're smiling, nodding, so I can see it seems like that resonates. Um, well-designed content in front of people equates to capability change. It's not how learning works, and the research has said that for a while. What should replace it is a performance-first design mindset. I think that we should be reviewing performance problems and designing experiences that solve them, not just providing information and calling it training. There is a Bloom's taxonomy point that comes up for me in this case, actually. Taxonomy gives us 6 levels of cognitive complexity from remember up to create, and most corporate training lives at the bottom 2, right? But in the AI, the most strategic critical level has become evaluate. So can your people assess what AI produces and determine what's actually true and usable? There's plagiarism checkers. There's concerns about hallucination. So these are all factors in the equation. I think that's a cognitive demand our design frameworks are still catching up to. And another final point is about ADDIE. The model built for a world with a more linear timeline and more predictable environments.
What ADDIE is, because we don't necessarily have people who know what that will mean.
Sure, it's a model: assess, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. It's the whole-scale version of when you have a new training project. For example, if you have to build a course or micro-learning or some other training modality, you start with the assessment of the situation. Where do you want to be versus where you are now? You do something known as a needs analysis. Then you go from there and you come up with a design. Usually use a design document as a framing document. Then you develop what you've come up with. If it's an e-learning, you might use a tool like Articulate Rise or Storyline, or a simple PowerPoint if it's instructor-led, or a tool like Prezi or Canva. And then you would implement that training and then come back and evaluate it, evaluating the training. And you evaluate can be used throughout the model to evaluate, as you go. So that's an example of that model. I think that the original model can feel slow in fast-moving environments. And I think more recently, those phases are overlapping, like the evaluation piece. I think you prototype earlier now. You test small before you build big, so you avoid wasting money, time, etc. There's also an agile and a SAM model that are versions of instructional model or design model that you can also look at, that I think has more of that iteration feeling or spirit. And I believe that the iterative models have power and how good designers work together. There's always caveats, but those are some things to consider moving forward.
You mentioned Bloom's taxonomy. And when we're talking about Bloom, we're talking about first understanding, and then, knowing and then understanding. And so often, the training that I have done internationally, there have been trainers who are focused right there. They don't move beyond that. And what we're talking about is we want to get them to application, because it's one thing to know something and not be able to understand it. It's another thing to understand it but not able to use it. And we are focusing on performance, so we're focusing on skill application. And then anything above that is really gravy. Because
Yeah.
But if you could just lay out what those steps are so people know when you say Bloom's taxonomy, what you have in mind.
Well, I think that you started to get into a little bit. It's like the knowing, or remembering, understanding, applying, evaluating, creating. I think those are all different levels of being able to interact with learning content. Role playing, simulations are at the higher level, and I think that relates to experiential learning. I think people learn best by doing. And that relates to the performance point that we were talking about earlier. So I think that it's important as we go forward in the age of AI and just more effective training to lean more on the higher levels of the taxonomy, to use when we're coming up with learning objectives, picking adjectives that relate as directly and specifically as accurately as possible with what you're trying to accomplish, not just in the training, but from the larger performance goals or the performance outcomes, which feed into the organizational outcomes, which is the ultimate goal. How does the learner perform when they go back onto the job? So making sure that the way you plan things using Bloom's or some of these different models, we just need to reevaluate that and consider things like AI and how that fits into it to make things more modernized and more effective.
Because
Because
we
if the
want
training doesn't,
change.
sorry, go ahead.
We want behavioral change on the job.
Behavioral change. Right. No, exactly. We won't be able to show the return on investment. So there's more training in the future that, management is willing to pay for it, and there's the budget that, that might get cut first. I think happens quite a bit. So number of factors to consider. So
When we think about the fact that organizations can't survive without their employees, and they don't survive well if their employees don't perform well, the idea that learning is some external thing as opposed to something critical, necessary to the lifeblood of an organization is really a shame.
I agree 100%. And I think employees that see that leadership is investing in them, whether it's leadership or other, benefits, I think they become more loyal and they show up more intentionally when they go to a learning event or they're asked to do micro learning or mentor someone else. So I think it stretches beyond. You invest in your employees and they will pay tenfold.
And there's a whole generation or more of employees who aren't going to stay if they don't feel that they are progressing, that they are learning and developing new skills. How are you leveraging data, technology, or new learning methods to create more personalized and effective learning experiences?
Thank you for that question. I do want to mention first that to me, personalization or personalized learning starts before the content, with understanding things such as the specific person's context, their constraints, and their relationship to the subject matter. I think that what's most personalization technology looks at, it still misses. It can adapt things such as pathways and pace of the training, but can't account for why someone is resistant or distracted or anxious before they open a module or take a course. Some people are voluntold to attend a course, for example, versus volunteering. So I think that's also a factor. So here's an example of what I mean. This year, I built a voice to spreadsheet logging tool for a client using Google Apps Script and connect to the Claude AI tool. So the client wanted to track her meals by speaking naturally using the system that she uses, using a microphone or scanning a handwritten food journal. So she didn't want to do typing or use any apps. This was a web interface. So that the data would land in a version of the handwritten food journal she was already using every day. The reason it worked is because I started with her actual behavior pattern, not with what the technology could theoretically do. So we looked at her patterns, what worked, and we kind of worked that into the system with this new system of spoken or scanning the journals into the system, which would push it into the Google spreadsheet. So the training wasn't a manual, although we had minute notes, with step-by-step instructions. It was a conversation about her workflow, her confidence level, and where she would probably get stuck. And we had to iterate it a few times, but she was on board because she saw the progression and she became more confident with the technology. And I think that's the full arc of personalization, starting with the behavior, designing to fit it, then teaching in a way that matches how that specific person actually learns. And I would say that the science behind AI and micro learning is solid. Spaced repetition, cognitive load theory, these aren't new ideas, but I'd say the AI is finally letting us apply them at scale in ways we couldn't before. Gartner, for example, projects that AI is going to personalize 80% of corporate learning content in the near term, and I believe that. But I do push back a little bit. We're over-indexing on delivery and under-investing in design. So I think that AI can personalize what you see and what you see, and when you see it, it can't account for the emotional relationship a learner brings to the content before they click on something. That's still the human work we do. And I think in a field that's rushing towards automation, that's exactly where the real competitive advantage lives.
Yeah, people really underestimate how vulnerable people feel when they're faced with learning something new and with change. And when
Change
technology
is
is thrown on top of that, it makes the fear even more palpable.
whether it's a workplace environment change or leadership change or the change of technology, which is a tsunami. I talk about that in my coaching. I mean, coaching adjacent to training, the coaching like change and fear of change, fear of technology. That's a big thing that shows up. And that's part of my mission, is to help people feel more comfortable and provide a space where they can express that concern and be able to, work on that. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. Very necessary. If you could give one piece of advice to leaders who want to build a true culture of continuous learning, what would it be?
This may be an unexpected answer, but I would say modeling humility in public. For example, saying out loud in front of your team, I was wrong about this, or here's what changed my thinking. Here's what I'm doing differently. Because I think this leads into extreme ownership as well, a concept by Jocko Willink, and he's a former Navy SEAL. So I believe that the most powerful signal a leader can send, it may be unpopular, because I think people watch not just the learning program, they watch as the leader, whether they're going to punish intellectual risk or get curious about it. And research consistently ties engagement directly to whether employees feel their growth is seen and supported by their immediate leader, not just the organization abstractly. So I think we need leaders who debrief and ask questions such as, what did we learn from that? As consistently as they ask, what's the status? I believe that's where the learning culture actually lives.
Moving away from blaming when something doesn't go wrong to seeing it as a learning opportunity and maintaining that psychological safety sense. It's very hard to be willing to risk if you don't see that you have a manager or a leader who accepts risk as part of the learning strategy.
What is the leadership modeling? Is it fear? Is there something that you're going to be reprimanded for by putting yourself out there, or is it vulnerability and courage? Is those the values that you want to see modeled in a good leader? So.
What's one book, resource, or learning experience that has had a lasting impact on you personally?
One book is actually a coaching related, and it's actually a full program I went through. It's the Proactive Coaching by Kimsey House. And the core principle is that people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And it sounds pretty simple until you try to design a learning experience from it. Then everything changes. You stop treating the learner as a problem or a fix, and instead as a capacity to activate. And it runs through everything I design and how I coach. It also is a nod to design thinking, where empathy is incorporated into the design process and works alongside with the ADDIE process model we talked about earlier. So I think it's really important to look at people as whole entities. They're an ecosystem. You should look at their needs, ask what's in it for them when you're designing training for them, learner-centered design. There's a lot of theories out there which I think are even more relevant and pressing in the age of AI. So.
What would you like to add?
I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of fear, but there's also a lot of opportunity. I think part of showing up in this space is instead of having judgment and fear, try and approach situations in the learning development arena with curiosity. Instead of saying, why is this happening? Or why is this situation with my manager happening? Or why is the industry going to, whatever, getting curious. Okay, this is happening. This is information. What can I do with this information that will allow me to kind of move forward with my career and more empowered personally? So I think that's something that we need to remember. And feeling gratitude. I have a gratitude practice I do every morning, thinking about 10 things from the day before. And I think that's a great level set. If we approach life and learning from a place of gratitude, it's the antidote to fear. And I think it's something we should try, think differently. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that.
Thank you.
How can people get in touch with you, Marc?
The best way would be through LinkedIn. So you can just do a search, Marc Stoecker, and my name's on the, it's M-A-R-C. So look for me on LinkedIn. You can also email me at prismofpurpose@gmail.com. I'm currently updating my website, so I would say focus on LinkedIn and the email for now to reach out. I'd love to have a conversation about learning development or coaching because I'm passionate about this work. I love doing these type of engagements, and I really appreciate you allowing me to be on your show today.
Oh, I'm so happy that you were. Thank you so much. And thank you, our listeners, for listening in and participating in our conversation. I hope that you learned as much from this session as I did. Join us next week on June 19th as we meet with Calvin Stovall, the Director of Executive Programs at the Advanced Leadership Institute. If you'd like to assess the skills of your trainers and your managers, please reach out to me on LinkedIn to receive a free assessment that you can use. Because as we've talked about today, we need trainers who understand how to design for performance change. And please remember that Laurel & Associates is always focused on making lackluster leaders legendary as smart learning fuels real business results. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Learning Advantage from Insight to Impact. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week.
Every lesson, every workshop, every failed attempt you save becomes a map upon the desktop, showing